Recovery is stupendous.
Achievable.
Hope.
Freedom.
Empowering.
It's unique to everyone.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Getting a new lease on life.
Finding restoration after you fall down.
Recovery is having the freedom to enjoy life.
For me, it was finding a way to really love myself.
My recovery is possible in part because of my own sense of purpose.
Welcome to Montana's Peer Network Recovery Talks podcast. I'm Jim Haney, Executive Director, and I want to thank you for tuning in to another episode. Today we're going to be, I have two guests that are here today, and we're going to be talking about why me? As a person in recovery, you're saying, why me? Why should I be involved in the recovery movement? Why is that important? What do I have to give? What's the value in it? We're going to be exploring those topics. Two guests, and let's have you introduce yourselves.
Well, thanks for inviting me here this morning, Jim. I'm happy to be here. My name is Jennifer Driscoll. I am a certified peer support specialist out of Missoula, Montana. I've had my certification since July of 2019. And
Excellent.
Here.
Thanks for being here.
Morning. Thanks for having me, Jim. This is Todd Tecca. I'm the certified peer support specialist out of Helena. And I love doing these podcasts because they're always so on topic and helpful. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm glad you could take the time. And for the listener, Todd and Jennifer bring a lot to the table. A lot of great experience, a lot of great insight. And so really looking forward to our conversation on why me. So let's jump right in.
So I remember being in early recovery and having a particular person or several people that would kind of be argumentative or, sort of poke me with things that I had done wrong in my days of before recovery. And I really was confused of how to handle that and reached out to one of my mentors because I was out of ideas. I didn't know how to word anything that would be respectful and safe and emotional. And so my mentor came up with a couple of sentences that could be used, something along the order of, well, thank you for your honesty and thank you for sharing your perspective. I really appreciate that and we'll take it into consideration. And, we realized that something like that was, understanding the other person's side of things, and validating that, but not being drawn into the argument. So that's something that I have used in all kinds of different situations, even up to modern, even up to now in my recovery. And I remember being on social media and seeing something that a sober sister replied to someone that was trying to be argumentative to her. And I privately commented and complimented her on her response. And she messaged me back and said, well, actually, I learned that from you. So I realized, that the concept of finding a way to answer that is still respectful and not being drawn into the argument that I had asked for help for and had used was able to be passed on to someone else and be used. So that's one of the beautiful circles of recovery, I think.
That's fantastic, Jennifer. That's a great example. It kind of reminds me of how I got started doing this work. So back in 2008, I was guiding doing private guide trips in Yellowstone, and I had this picture framing business, and I make custom picture frames. And in the guiding season, when it would end, like in the fall, I would look to pick up a part-time job. And so I would start looking late summer, kind of looking in the paper, seeing what was available. And I had I think I had like 14 years in recovery, and I wasn't doing any peer support. I wasn't, nothing. And I picked up the paper and I saw this ad, and it said something like, mental health center now hiring a peer supporter for new drop-in center program, or something, co-occurring diagnosis required, something like that. And I applied, but I still had more work. The season wasn't quite over. And I remember I dropped off my resume and I went and these trips, and I came back and my wife said, "Hey, you have a message for, an interview with the mental health center." And I hadn't been in a mental health center for a number of years. I mean, I had gone to one as a client, but then hadn't been in one. And so I found myself interviewing for this job in a mental health center, and it was a really strange experience because I wasn't there as a client, or right. Anyway, I end up, they offer me, at first I don't get offered the job, and then they call me back like a few weeks later and they go, "Hey, the person didn't accept the job, blah, blah, blah. So they offer me, I actually first came in a part-time position, and there was no program director. There was no program. They just had gotten a bunch of money. And and then when I look back, I mean, I chuckled today because I had no idea what was in store for me over the next, what is it now, 12, almost 12 years. I had no idea that it was going to lead me, down this path of not doing guiding, not doing picture framing, two things I really had loved doing. I had no intention of leaving those things, but my recovery led me in this direction. And very quickly they were like, "Hey, instead of working part-time, would you consider being the director?" And so I became the director there. And I did that for
Wow.
3 years before starting Montana's Peer Network. And then, of course, all the work, with the legislature and all this stuff, training. And so there's all of that, but there's also the growth in my own personal recovery that really was super impactful. And I was not really prepared for that. Nobody said like, "Hey, you're going to really grow in your own recovery if you go take this job running a program." And so it's really, I will often sort of reflect back. I'll run into somebody who used to go to the drop-in center or something and start talking. And then I sort of reflect back and I think, wow, what if I hadn't applied for that job? What if I hadn't, went for that and just kept kind of doing what I was doing? Or what if I just stayed part-time? Like what would, what would, what would my life be like? And I've grown personally so much and been given so many wonderful opportunities to impact the system and people's lives and train peer supporters. How cool is that to be trained as a peer supporter? Yeah, I don't know. That's what I was thinking of when you were sharing. I was thinking of like myself in the beginning and how different it was. Not at all what I expected. And
Right.
was not prepared, Yeah. What about for you, Todd? What are your thoughts on kind of what Jennifer's sharing there, or the value?
Yeah, I think the value for me I've found is actually being able to help people with my own personal experience. Looking back, especially when I started recovery, I was pretty tentative about it. I wasn't sure what I was getting into. I know I needed it, and was able to find, the Montana Peer Network and some good mentoring, and then some good mentoring in the community itself. And the more I got involved and I actually started working in mental health, the thing that became most evident to me was that the more I shared my story, the easier it got. But I started to see the impact that it made with other people who were still scared to share their story, still unsure of what the reaction would be and why it was important to share that. And I think the one memory that sticks out for me was I had a client one time that would come to groups and was very quiet and, very depressed and dealing with a lot of stuff. And over the next couple of weeks, they were able to work through that. On the way out the door, she actually stopped me and said, I want to thank you for sharing your story and being so open and honest about your challenges in life in general, because she said, now I know that I can go back and do my job and it's not the end of my world and I can still raise my kids and have a life. And for me, that was the biggest compliment, that I could think of, because it does make an impact on other people when you share the challenges that you've been through and that are still facing, because recovery is not really ever ending. It's something that you work on every day. So
Right.
to be able to share that has actually been more of a gift for me than maybe other people. But
Yeah. And sometimes we don't know what the impact is, right? Like I remember very early on, gosh, this would be like, it was early on at MPN, 2011, maybe 2012, somewhere in there. And I had taken have either one of you taken the NAMI in our own voice class?
yeah,
Yeah, you took it. Jennifer, have you ever taken that?
No, that sounds like a good one.
Yeah, anyway, it teaches you it's like a format for telling your story. Like ours is called Recovery Talks, theirs is called In Our Own Voice. Anyway, once you do that, then they kind of help you set up opportunities to go tell your story. And I had done a handful of them, and I had been working at the drop-in center, so I was kind of comfortable with telling my story. But I did one with another peer in Bozeman at the library. I got an opportunity. So this was a public thing, and big group of people show up, and you know, her and I had this thing where we sort of went back and forth telling our story, and we go through, and then we took questions at the end. And there was this one guy who was asking questions, and he had a family member who had a diagnosis who wasn't in recovery, who was unwell. And afterwards, he stayed and talked to me some more and got my number. And like a week later, the guy calls me up and he goes, you don't really know who I am, do you? And I'm like, yeah, you're the guy at the library, right? And he's like, yeah. But he's like, I got this radio show in Bozeman. He's like, I want to know if you want to come on next Saturday, and you can come on for like 2 hours and you can talk about mental health recovery. And so here I was, like 2 weeks later, I'm on the radio. I think he had like a 40,000 person listenership. And so, boom, here you
wow,
are on the radio, and we're having this conversation just like we're doing here. And so that was really weird to be in a studio, and we took calls, people called in, and but it was priceless because it reached out to so many people and it was free. I mean, he was just offering it up, just like, hey, come on this show and talk about this really important topic. And that opened up other doors then for me. And I went on the, gosh, what's it called? The Ag Network. I ended up going on the Ag Network, which goes to like North Dakota, South
Oh,
Dakota,
no
Montana,
way.
Wyoming. Oh God, that was even bigger. We had to go to Billings at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were on for like, I forgot, that one was even longer. I forget, it was like 3 hours or 4 hours. It was long, and
oh,
that led to that, and like, and I think about, it's like it all had to do with me having the courage to go to the class, right? And then NAMI kind of helps you open up some doors to do presentations. And then, of course, you have to say yes, and then you have to show up. And all of a sudden, I think, wow, that one class led to me sharing my experience, my recovery experience, with like 100,000 people within just, a short period of time. I mean, within 6 months, all these radio sort of opportunities came my way. And so I think, there's a ton of value, and often I remind myself that I don't know where this good thing that I'm doing today, I don't know where it's going to lead. I don't know what doors it's going to open. And if I don't do it, I'll never know. If I don't risk, I don't know. Just like doing this podcast with the two of you, you just don't know. I mean, we have no idea who's going to chime in, right? Somebody could send me an email and say, "Oh, I heard Jennifer and Todd on. You guys were talking about, getting involved," and who knows the impact down the road.
Yeah, we always I always compare it to the ripple effect, right? Because my story affects the people closest to me that know, and understand. But what we're sending out into the world and that positivity may be enough to actually change somebody else's life for the positive, which then impacts everybody in their life,
Yeah.
And so you have no idea how far your story will go.
I had this week, we sold a Healthy Minds, Healthy Bodies workbook to a person in Australia.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I mean, just what you're saying, Todd, you're right on point. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I was shocked when the order came in. I was like, oh my gosh, like, we kind of forget when you put stuff out on the internet, whether it's a podcast or our story on YouTube or, a workbook on a website. I mean, it's the entire world can tune in. Yesterday, Jennifer, when you were on the webinar, one of the people on there sent me an email afterwards and said, "Hey, thanks," and yada yada yada. And they were a peer supporter down in Miami, Florida.
Oh, wow.
Those things definitely happen. I remember being in DC for our SAMHSA. We have to go for SAMHSA as a grantee to these meetings, and it was the last day, and we were on the shuttle going back to the hotel, and one of the guys said, "Hey, what time are you flying back to Montana?" And I said, I'm going to stay another day. I want to do some sightseeing. You're in Washington, D.C. It's like, oh, I want to go see some stuff. And he goes, "Oh, that's cool." He goes, "Are you going to do a 5 Good Minutes?" And that was this video series that I did back in 2017, where I did 5 minutes and posted it up weekly. And he was from another state, and I was like, "Wow, you watched that?" Because it only had to do with Montana. We were trying to pass get the bill passed for certification, and and he was like, "Oh yeah, we all watch it in the office."
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, yeah, like, I mean, it has no relevance really to another state. There was no relevance. It was only, about what we were doing, advocacy. And it was just 5 minutes, totally off the cuff, and just sort of a quick update, and I'd post them up really fast. And each week, it was just a way that we had tried that for like about a year, I guess. And yeah, and it turned out other people were watching it.
That is an awesome story, and that actually kind of leads to a point that I was going to bring up is kind of the networking side of it, and just the fact that you might have thought that it had no relevance to anybody else in another state, but just learning the details of how you are advocating and how you are approaching the legislator might actually help someone else who's trying to do the same thing in their state that might not have any idea of how to approach it. Yes, you would have to, maneuver the details to match your particular situation, but the concepts would probably still be very usable.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, Jennifer, great point. I have a consulting job right now with another state, and they're going through the process that we were doing back then in 2017. And that's the stuff that I'm sharing with them this is how we gained momentum. These are the things we did before the legislative session, not the during the session, right? These are all the things you do before to sort of build up towards it. so you have consensus and you have a unified voice. And yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it just in recovery, those things happen because if you're positive and you're compassionate and you're this is a word I learned doing this work is selfless, right? Which is like the opposite of selfish, which is how we are, I think how we are, how I was. When I'm not well, I'm more selfish. I'm more what's in it for me. But I think when you become a peer supporter, you become more selfless. You're willing to give more of yourself without necessarily knowing, oh, this is what I'm getting in return, because there's so much more down the road that is going to come back to you if you're doing the good work that peer support is, or even just getting up and telling your story and how impactful that can be to people. So definitely.
Yeah.
So Todd, you had wanted to sort of preface this with the why me, like that sort of question, like we're asking people in recovery, we're asking members to step up, to be advocates, to share their story, to become peer leaders, to get involved with local advisory councils or community activities around recovery. And so I know you had used that phrase, why me? What are your thoughts about that? Expound on that.
Well, I think definitely, I've heard that before when we talk to people about getting involved. And the thing that always comes back to me is that aside from the networking part, because everybody knows somebody else, right, that can help, is that not everyone is going to be able to relate to one person. And so it's important for everybody to be able to share their stories because, as much as I'm happy to talk about my story, there are people who are not going to relate to that. But they may relate to someone else who has a story that's closer to their, what they're going through, what they're dealing with, and that would help them to move on in their recovery. And so, as far as why me, there's, that's a huge piece is because first of all, I think if you're involved, it does help with your own recovery in a lot of ways. And then you're providing some hope for someone else, and you get to actually see that a lot of the times because, as you're talking, sometimes you see that aha moment that they finally something clicks and they start to understand that, it really isn't the end of their life and that there's life after this and it can be better because you're taking charge of your recovery instead of letting your life run you kind of. And I know for me that was a big step, because I'd always, everything was always helter skelter kind of. And then finally when I got a grip on things, I started to take care of myself, get a better understanding of recovery and what I needed, who could help, and I was able to start running my life, and that makes a huge difference. And so a big piece of that is being able to share that with people so that they understand, and not just necessarily folks in recovery, but their family members as well, because a lot of times their closest friends and their family members, the people that they love that want to help, really don't understand, and they may not be able to explain it to them. So we're in a position where we can say, gosh, here, let me try and explain it from a different point of view, to help them understand how better to help their loved one. So if everybody's involved, we're all helping each other and it becomes this big circuit of positivity, really, and support. And so, it's hard to sit outside that circle and not be involved and feel like you're getting anything accomplished.
You bring up a good point there with the family member, a loved one who's very emotionally attached to the individual, and that can, while they're well-meaning, that can often be an obstacle. Whereas I think as a person in recovery, you can come at it from, hey, I want to be compassionate and I want to be supportive, but I'm not emotionally attached to this person the way the family member is, and be able to bring your own lived experience to the table, but still it's not the same, that emotional attachment. I see that as an obstacle many times in working with people where loved ones are involved. They care so much that it becomes this obstacle to actually supporting the person in recovery.
They see them when they're well, and then
Mm-hmm.
they see them when they're not well, and they don't really. It's frustrating for them to know that they could be doing better and they're not, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so that always helps to try and explain a little bit, so they get it.
Yeah. Jennifer, how about you? What's your thoughts on that? The why me? What would you say to somebody who says why me?
Right. I think the why me is that once you do get involved with a group, it becomes super clear that everyone is bringing some similar talents, but also something unique of themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so that can be what the why me, like
Mm-hmm.
you have your own perspectives and your own talents, and that can be super valuable in, the larger community. And you
Mm-hmm.
may realize that until you actually start to get involved. But part of the learning experience that everyone has in being involved, it's that you are giving your own perspective and you're learning the perspective of others, and that just kind of helps everybody grow and find fresh ideas and ways to work together. And so I think, a lot of people just have a little bit of fear, like, I don't have necessarily anything to offer, but that is absolutely not true. Everybody has something. It might just take a little bit of time to recognize that or to bring that out.
Great point. Great point. For sure. For sure. 'Cause we just don't know. I mean, we really don't. I, I, I guess for me, I just can't stress that enough to somebody when it's, if I think about that question, if somebody asks, why me? I would say, why not? Why not you? Why not? Because I had no idea where that ad in the local paper was going to take me. I had no idea, the opportunities and the oh, I mean the challenges and the new pathways that I have been able to create for myself in my own life, in my own recovery, and then for that to, lead me to a place where I can help other people. I had no idea. That was not the ad I was responding to. Hey, run a nonprofit and, train people in peer support. That was not the ad. The ad was, 10 hours a week, in a program here. And if you don't open the door, the opportunity door, you're never going to know what's on the other side of it. You're never going to know. And I think I agree with everything that the two of you have shared here. Your story is unique, and somebody out there needs to hear it, and you have no idea when they're going to hear it.
Right.
This podcast, will be out there, and people from around the world can listen to it, and not just tomorrow, but 3 months from now, somebody is doing an internet search and comes across it and clicks on it, and something you said, Jennifer, you know, inspires them, gives them hope. That's so powerful. It's just so powerful. Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to wrap up today. I want to thank both of my guests. We've had a really good conversation about why me, being involved, what's the value as a person in recovery, why should I be part of this recovery movement, I want to thank both my guests, Todd and Jennifer, for taking the time. And I definitely would like to have the two of you come back on and do some more podcasts. So we should chat about that.
That'd be
So,
great. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay, well, as the listener, thank you so much for tuning in, and please check out our other podcasts. We do these every single week, and we're always doing having different guests and different topics and trying to keep it relevant to what's happening. If you have suggestions or you would like to be a guest on one of our podcasts, you can email me at jim@mtpeernetwork.org and let us know. If there's something you want us to talk about, let us know. We're happy to do that. So thanks again. Bye-bye.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works. Recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works.
And recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.